My name is Joaquim. I'm 78 years old, though some days I feel like I've already lived 3 lives. I was born in the countryside of Minas, raised with coffee on the tongue and earth under the nails. My hands have been calloused since I was 11. I never thought much about getting old. Not until it started happening. Not until I began forgetting things that once lived inside me like breath. It started with names. Then the days of the week. Then entire years went missing from my mind like pages torn from a book I didn't notice falling apart. The doctors gave it a name, Alzheimer's, but for me, it just felt like standing on a beach where the tide kept stealing the sand from under my feet. Slowly, quietly, but there are moments that stay sharp, moments even the illness can't smudge. And that Sunday at the market, I remember it with a clarity that almost feels like cruelty. My eldest son, Marcio, took me out that morning. It was supposed to be our routine, a walk through the open-air market, the smell of fried pastillas, and the old farmers selling sugarcane juice. I used to love going with him. I'd point out the vegetables, tell him how to pick the ripest papaya. I thought it made me useful again. We walked slowly. I remember holding his arm, not just to steady myself, but because I liked the feel of it, the warmth of my boy. He used to hold my hand when he was little, and now I was holding his, like the years had folded back on themselves. We stopped to look at some cassava. I was trying to remember how Maria, my late wife, used to peel it just right, without wasting the white flesh. I turned to tell Marcio, but he wasn't there. At first, I thought he had just stepped away, maybe to buy something. I waited. A few minutes. 10. Then 20. I walked to the next stall, then the next. I called his name. I asked the lady selling spices if she had seen a tall man with a gray shirt. She looked at me like I was drunk or confused. I told her I was with my son. I must have just lost him. But the truth was heavier than that. He had left me. Like a man might leave behind a bag of unwanted groceries. Like I had become one more weight he no longer wanted to carry. I sat on a bench near the entrance of the market. I remember the cold of the metal under me. I remember how people passed by, smiling, laughing, bags of fruit in hand, as if the world hadn't just torn a hole right through my chest. I waited for hours. The sky changed color. The vendors started packing up. One of them, a kind boy named Elias, I later learned, asked me if I was lost. I said no, but my voice broke, because maybe I was. Not just in the market, but in life. When Elias offered to call someone, I hesitated. I didn't want to bother Marcio. Deep down, I still believed it was a mistake, that he would come back, that he had just forgotten where I was. But he hadn't forgotten. When Elias finally called, Marcio didn't answer. 3 times. Then, finally, he picked up. I didn't hear what he said on the phone, but I saw Elias's face fall, like he'd heard something shameful. He hung up and told me gently, "Your son said he thought you'd find your way home, or that someone would help you." That was the moment, the exact second my heart cracked. He hadn't lost me. He had left me. On purpose. Like an old man with fading memory, had become more problem than parent. I didn't cry. I just looked down at my hands, these hands that built everything he ever had, and I wondered when they had stopped meaning anything to him. I had built our first home with these hands. I had worked 2 jobs to put food on his plate. I had gone hungry, so he wouldn't have to. I had sold my only gold chain to pay for his school books. And now I was a burden, left on a market bench like a forgotten coat. Elias called a cab, paid for it himself. When I got back to the house, the front gate was locked. I knocked softly, then harder. Eventually, Marcio opened the door. He looked surprised, but not ashamed. "Pa, you made it," he said, almost cheerfully. "See, I told you you'd be fine." I just looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I had nothing to say to my own son, because something inside me had gone quiet, something that would not come back, the kind of silence that only comes after a man realizes that love, the love he spent a lifetime giving, has been quietly returned with dismissal. And in that silence, I began to remember things, not about dates or names, but about worth, about dignity, about the last thing a man can hold on to when everything else begins to slip away. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the photograph of Maria on the wall. And I knew. This wasn't just forgetfulness anymore. This was something worse. This was abandonment. And no illness, not even Alzheimer's, could erase that truth from my heart. And long before I became someone left behind on a market bench, I was a man who built his life with his own hands. Every brick, every hour, every meal on the table. I was never a man of great words. I didn't finish school. I learned to read with my wife's help after we got married. I always said, if I know how to use a hammer and make a roof stay up, then I know enough. But Maria, she believed in more. She believed that even the simplest man had a right to know more than just sweat. And so, in the quiet hours after dinner, after the kids had gone to bed, she would read to me. I remember the smell of the kerosene lamp, the way her voice wrapped around each word like it was something sacred. We had 3 children. Marcio was the first. I still remember the day he was born. I held him in my arms, so small and wrinkled, his face like an angry old man. I remember thinking, God trusted me with this? A life. A whole life to protect. Back then, we had nothing. We lived in a rented room with peeling paint and thin walls. I worked in construction 6 days a week, from sunrise until my legs gave out. On Sundays, I would fix people's fences or sweep yards for a little extra money. Every real I earned went to diapers, food, rent. I walked to work, patched my own boots with tire rubber, and skipped lunch more times than I can count just so the kids could eat meat at dinner. But none of that ever felt like sacrifice. Not really. It was love, turned into action. That's what being a father meant to me. When Maria got sick, that winter when her lungs began to betray her, I was already in my 50s. I took on night shifts, too. I'd work all day building houses for other people, then mop hospital floors at night. I remember dragging my feet home just as the sun rose, still smelling of bleach and tired dreams. I'd lie next to her for just an hour before getting up to make the kids breakfast. Marcio never saw all of it. Children don't, I suppose. And maybe that's how it should be. But sometimes I wonder if he ever felt the weight I carried. I remember one night, he must have been 14. I found him crying because he didn't have a proper jacket for school. I had just gotten home from work. My whole body ached. I was so tired, I could barely keep my eyes open. But I walked to the corner bar where a man owed me money for a roofing job. I asked for it, not kindly, not gently. I came back with just enough to buy Marcio a jacket from a used clothing stall. It smelled like mothballs and old smoke, but it was warm. He hugged me that night. Said, "Thanks, Pi. You always find a way." And I did. For years. When Maria passed, the world became quieter. That was when I began to feel the cracks. Not in my mind. Not yet, but in the way time changed things. The children grew. They found their lives, their homes, their people. I was happy for them. That's what a father wants, to give them a better start than he had. I stayed in the same little house, the same one I had worked half my life to build, brick by brick, one paycheck at a time. The paint peeled, the windows stuck, but it was mine, ours. In those early years after Maria was gone, Marcio would still visit. On Sundays, he'd bring the grandkids. I used to roast chicken with Rosemary, the way she used to. The smell would fill the kitchen, and for a few hours, I felt whole again. But slowly, the visits became shorter. Then fewer. He said work was demanding, that the kids had school, that his wife didn't like driving out so far. I understood, or at least I tried to. So I started going to them. I'd take the bus, sometimes two. I'd sit on the bench outside their building, holding a bag of fruit or a homemade cake. Sometimes I waited hours. Sometimes they forgot I was coming. But I kept trying, because that's what fathers do. We keep showing up, even when no one is watching, even when we're no longer needed. I remember one day, I must have been around 70 by then, Marcio sat me down and said, "Pi, why don't you come live with us? It'll be easier. You're getting older." At first, I refused. My house was full of memories. I had my garden, my neighbors, my corner store. But he insisted, and in the end, I agreed. I thought it was an act of love, but maybe it was something else. A sense of obligation, or worse, pity. He moved me into the guest room, the one next to the laundry machine. It smelled like soap and damp clothes. I brought a few pictures, a small radio, my old blanket, but it never felt like mine. Still, I was grateful, or tried to be. And then, little by little, things began to vanish from me. Dates, words, familiar streets. Once, I got lost walking just 3 blocks from the apartment. I forgot the name of Maria's sister, a woman I'd known for 50 years. I started confusing my grandchildren's names. I saw the way Marcio looked at me, not with concern, but with something else. Impatience, maybe even shame. I tried to hide it. I wrote things down. I rehearsed answers in my head. I smiled when I felt lost. I nodded when I didn't understand. But it's hard to mask the slow sinking of your own mind. And I could feel it, the shift. I wasn't the strong father anymore, the man who always found a way. I was becoming the old man who misplaced keys, who asked the same questions twice, who stood in the kitchen and forgot why. And maybe that's when it started. Not the forgetting, but the being forgotten. A man can live with his body breaking down. But it's another thing entirely when the people you built your world around begin to look through you, like you're already fading. And maybe in some way I was, but not enough to forget what love feels like, and certainly not enough to miss the quiet pain of being treated like a burden. That memory of carrying Marcio in my arms as a baby, swaddled in a warm blue towel, is still with me. And that's the cruel grace of it all. My mind forgets so much, but not that. Not the weight of his small body. Not the promise I made to him, though he couldn't hear it then. I will never leave you. Not ever. And now, here I am, an old man with broken memory, trying to understand why my son never made the same promise back. And it's strange how silence becomes the loudest part of your life when you're no longer seen. After I moved in with Marcio and his family, I tried to keep my world small and easy. I didn't want to be a burden. I stayed out of the way, kept to my little corner of the house. I folded my own clothes, washed my plate after every meal, and swept the hallway when no one was looking. I thought maybe, if I stayed useful, they'd still see me, still need me. But the days started to stretch longer, and the house somehow felt smaller. The guest room wasn't really mine. There were still boxes in the closet, things Marcio said he would move but never did. His wife, Clarice, didn't speak much to me. Not unkind, just brief. She'd walk past me like I was a hallway mirror, something to glance at, not really see. When she talked to the kids, her voice was full of song. But when she spoke to me, it was quick and dry, like water rationed out in drought. I remember one morning, I woke up early and tried to fry some eggs. Thought I'd surprise them. When they came to the kitchen, the kids looked confused. Clarice looked annoyed. "Pie," Marcio said. "You don't need to do that. Just rest." Rest. That word started to sting. Because it wasn't about kindness. It was about pushing me to the edges. It meant, don't try to belong here. Just be quiet. Just fade. So I did. I stopped cooking. I stopped offering. I learned to become part of the furniture, something no one thinks about unless it's in the way. Then came the forgetting. Not just from my mind, but from theirs. They'd go out and not tell me. I'd wake up to an empty house. No note, no food left out. Just silence and a ticking wall clock. I'd sit by the window, watching people pass. Sometimes I thought of asking the neighbors if I could help water their plants, just to feel needed. One Saturday, I got confused. I thought it was Sunday and dressed up, thinking we were going to church. I shaved carefully, used the cologne Maria always liked, and waited by the door with my hat in hand. No one noticed. When Marcio finally walked into the living room, he looked at me and said, "Pie, why are you dressed?" I told him I thought it was Sunday, that maybe we were going to Mass. He sighed, not the sigh of worry, but of inconvenience. "No, Pie, it's Saturday. Just go rest, okay?" I nodded, turned around, went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands again. These same hands that once held Marcio's fevered head through the night, when he was 7, who built a bunk bed from scraps of wood because we couldn't afford to buy one, who held Maria's hand as she slipped away. Now they were hands that forgot what day it was, hands that brought sighs instead of smiles. There were fewer family meals. The children ate in front of the TV now. They didn't ask if I'd eaten. Sometimes I'd sit at the table alone, long after the food was gone, just to pretend we still shared that time. I tried calling my daughter, Aline, one afternoon, just to hear a familiar voice. But she didn't answer. I tried again the next day. Still nothing. When I asked Marcio if she was okay, he said, "She's busy, Pi. Let her live her life." Let her live her life. As if I was something that might interfere with it. I kept to my room more after that. Not out of anger, but because I felt ashamed for needing anyone at all. Once, I overheard Clarice talking to Marcio in the kitchen. "This can't keep going," she said. "He's getting worse. You saw him yesterday. He put the sugar in the fridge. What if he turns on the stove and forgets? What if something happens when we're not home?" Marcio replied, "I know. But what do you want me to do?" And then the quiet. No one said it, but I heard the unspoken thought hanging between them. He doesn't belong here anymore. That night, I laid awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator through the wall. My memory was failing, yes, but some things were becoming clearer than ever. The house was filled with voices and footsteps, but I was no longer part of the rhythm. I was out of sync, like a song they no longer wanted to hear. Marcio stopped asking how I was sleeping. He stopped bringing me fruit from the market. On Sundays, he'd put on soccer and tell the kids to go play in their rooms, so I wouldn't get confused by all the noise. Even my name faded from their mouths. I became Pi in passing, him in conversations. One day, I couldn't find my slippers. I asked Marcio where they were, and he said, "They're wherever you left them, Pi. Try to remember for once. Try to remember." The cruelty of that sentence, said so carelessly, without pause. I wanted to scream. Do you think I don't want to remember? Do you think I enjoy this fog, this fear, this shrinking of myself? But I said nothing, just nodded and went back to my room in my socks. There's a different kind of cold that settles in when the people you raised start looking at you like a chore. It's not the cold of weather, it's the cold of absence. A chill that creeps into your bones when love becomes obligation. And still, I try to be grateful. For a roof. For food. For their presence, even if it was just physical. But gratitude cannot survive where dignity is stripped day by day. There was no big fight. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just a slow dimming. And that's what made it worse. Because love doesn't disappear in a crash. It dissolves. Like sugar in coffee. Until one day, the sweetness is gone, and all that's left is the bitter taste of what used to be. And so I sat most evenings on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the same four walls, wondering, when did I stop being a father and start being just an old man in the way? That question, more than the memory loss, is what broke me, because I had given everything I had. Every year, every coin, every hour of sleep, every piece of myself. And now, I was becoming invisible in the very house I had once held together with my bare hands. And there's a kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound. It comes from being erased. I remember the day it happened, though not the date. These days, calendars slip away from me like fallen leaves. But the moment itself, that I remember, not just with my mind, but with my chest, with that quiet corner of the heart that still feels, even when the rest begins to fade. It was Marcio's birthday. I had remembered that. I don't know how, but I had. I woke up with the date clear in my mind, as if Maria herself had whispered it to me in my sleep. July, mid-month, the day our firstborn arrived, screaming in red, in a tiny countryside hospital room, with cracked tiles and a single flickering bulb. I had planned something, in my own small way. I'd saved up the little money I had, some coins in a jar, tucked behind my socks, and bought him a simple gift the week before, a blue flannel shirt. Nothing fancy, but I remembered him saying once that he missed the shirts I used to wear on the farm. The real ones, he called them. So I found one that looked like that, folded it neatly, wrapped it in an old newspaper, the way Maria used to wrap gifts when times were lean. That morning, I got up early and shaved slowly, even though the tremor in my hand made it harder now. I put on my best shirt, a pale yellow one that had started to fray at the collar, and combed my thinning hair carefully in front of the mirror, tracing each line of my face like I was studying a map. The house was full of movement. Clarice was in the kitchen. The children were running down the hallway. I could smell cake, something chocolate. There was music playing low from the living room speakers, the kind that makes you feel like life is happening, full and fast. I waited in my room for a bit. I didn't want to get in the way. That's what they always said. Just don't get in the way. So I waited until the voices grew louder, until I heard the front door open and guests began arriving. Laughter, footsteps, slaps on backs, glasses clinking. I took the gift in my hand and walked out slowly. No one noticed me at first. I stood in the hallway, just beyond the living room, the smell of roasted meat and perfume filling the air. There must have been 15 people there, friends, co-workers, neighbors. Clarice saw me. She smiled quickly, then turned back to the kitchen. I looked for Marcio. He was laughing with someone, holding a beer, standing by the window. I stepped closer. "Marcio," I said softly. He didn't hear, so I tried again. A little louder. "Marcio." He turned, saw me, and for the briefest moment, his face dropped. Just a flicker, but I caught it. That look. The one that says, "What are you doing here?" "Pi," he said, walking over. "Can you go sit in your room for a bit? We're just settling everyone in." I blinked. "I wanted to give you." He cut me off. "Later, okay? There's too much going on right now. You'll forget where you put your things." I stood there, holding the little gift wrapped in newspaper, feeling the heat rise to my ears. "I remember," I said. "It's your birthday." "I know," he said quickly, glancing back at his friends. "Thanks, Pi. I'll come see you later, okay?" He put a hand on my shoulder. Light, not affectionate, just enough pressure to turn me around. I walked back to my room, alone, the gift still in my hand. I sat on the bed and looked at the floor. No one knocked. No one came. I could hear them laughing, the children playing, Marcio's voice rising above the rest as he made a toast. I looked down at the shirt. The newspaper wrap had come undone at the corner. I rewrapped it slowly, smoothing the paper, folding the edge, tucking it under, like Maria would have done, and then I placed it in the drawer, carefully, without a word. Later that night, when the house had quieted, Marcio knocked on my door. "Pi, you okay?" I nodded. "I didn't mean to push you away," he said, standing in the doorway. "It's just you get confused sometimes, and I didn't want you to feel overwhelmed." Confused. That word again. I wanted to say, I wasn't confused today. I remembered your birthday. I remembered the flannel shirts. I remembered everything that mattered. But I didn't, because I realized something in that moment. Even when I remembered, it didn't matter. I had already become something they spoke around, planned around, avoided. I said, "I'm fine." He smiled, relieved. "Good. You know we love you, right?" I nodded again. He didn't see the gift. Didn't ask. Just closed the door behind him. And that was it. No shouting. No cruelty. Just the quiet moment a man realizes he is no longer invited to the table, even when he built it. The next morning, I opened the drawer and looked at the gift again. And I thought to myself, maybe I'm the one who's confused, thinking I still had a place here. But I wasn't. That was the truth of it. The clearest truth I had felt in months. I hadn't been confused at all. I had been watching, listening, and finally understanding. My presence was no longer a blessing. It was a complication. And that, more than any memory I'd lost, was the one that hurt the most. Because it meant I could still feel, even if I could no longer remember. And what I felt now was that it was time. Time to stop waiting for them to see me. Time to find a place where I wasn't someone to manage, but someone to be. To be simple again. Quiet, yes, but not erased. Because even in the dimming light of my mind, there was still a spark of dignity. And I would not let it die in a room I wasn't welcome in. And that night, after the birthday, after the knock on my door, after the soft lie of, "You know we love you, right?" I sat alone in the dark for a long time. The house was asleep. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the soft turning of a ceiling fan somewhere down the hallway. I watched the shadows of tree branches move across my window, shifting with the wind like fingers brushing against the glass. My eyes didn't blink much anymore in those hours. I just stared. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't shout. It doesn't come with anger or tears or loud, dramatic moments. No, it comes quietly, slowly, like rust. It settles in your chest, and one day, you realize you've been carrying it for far longer than you thought. That night, the pain was full. It sat beside me on the bed like an old friend. But there was no fight left in me, only thought. A deep, slow kind of thought. I wasn't angry with Marcio. That's the strange part. I wasn't even disappointed anymore. Something softer had taken its place, a kind of weary understanding. It's like I had finally accepted the shape of the world around me. And in doing so, I saw it clearly. This wasn't my home. Not really. Yes, my name was still on the family photos in the hallway. Yes, the children still called me Vovo when they remembered. But my presence no longer brought comfort, only inconvenience. And so, I thought, what if I simply stopped being in the way? Not to punish anyone, not out of spite, but because I deserve peace too. Dignity, even now, even in forgetting. I opened my old drawer and took out the shirt, the gift I had meant to give Marcio. I unfolded it, touched the fabric. It was a good shirt. Sturdy. Simple. Honest. Like the ones I used to wear when I still carried tools in my hands and smelled like sweat and soil. Then I folded it back up, placed it carefully inside the drawer again, and closed it slowly. I wasn't going to give it to him. I no longer needed to. In the corner of the room, under the bed, I kept an old canvas bag. It had been mine for decades, used on countless trips, filled with small groceries or bus station sandwiches or spare clothes when I stayed overnight at a hospital with Maria. I pulled it out now. Quietly. I didn't own much. Just a few changes of clothes, a worn Bible, a photograph of Maria, and a pair of cracked glasses I refused to replace. I packed slowly, folding each shirt like I was tucking away a memory. There was no rush. I moved in silence, like someone preparing for a long walk, but with no map. I didn't write a letter. I didn't leave a note. What would I say? That I was hurt? They knew, in their hearts, though they didn't speak it, that I felt forgotten. That had been obvious for months. That I was leaving. No, I wasn't running. I was just stepping aside, like a man making room on the sidewalk for others to pass. I took out my little notebook, the one where I tried to write down important names and addresses so I wouldn't forget them. There was a number in there, a place Maria and I had donated to once, a small elder shelter run by a group of kind women from a church. She used to call them the Warm Hands, because they treated the old folks there with such tenderness. I'd forgotten the name of the street, but the number was still there. Somehow, I looked at it, and I made my quiet decision. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The sky was still dark. The birds hadn't begun their songs yet. The house was completely still. I dressed carefully, a clean shirt, simple pants. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine, just the canvas bag, and Maria's photo, tucked into the inside pocket of my coat. I walked to the front door. I paused, not to cry, not to hesitate, but just to look, one last time, at the hallway, the kitchen lights which I had installed myself, the crooked family portrait, the scuff marks on the floor where the children dragged their backpacks. Then I opened the door and stepped out. The morning air hit me like a soft whisper. I walked slowly. The streets were empty, the world not yet awake. I found a bench near the bakery at the corner, the same one where Maria and I used to sit on Sundays, splitting a roll and a cup of coffee. I sat down and waited for the first bus. No one stopped me. No one called after me. No one asked where I was going. And that, too, was part of the truth. I took the bus into the city, sat by the window, watching as houses turned into storefronts and storefronts into gray walls and painted doors. I called the shelter from a public phone. A kind voice answered. Her name was Dona Iracema. She said, "Come, Senor Joaquim. We'll find you a bed. You're not alone here." And she meant it. By the time the sun was fully up, I had arrived. They gave me tea, a room, a chair near the garden. No questions, just presence. I didn't explain much, only that I needed a quiet place to stay. Donna Iracema smiled and said, "Here, no one is forgotten." And I believed her, because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like something left behind. I felt human. Not a father, not a problem, not a shadow in someone else's home. Just a man, breathing, sitting, existing with dignity. And in that moment, that small, quiet morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the loud kind. The kind that sits gently on your shoulders and whispers, "You did your part. You can rest now." I didn't need to be remembered by everyone. I just needed to stop being erased. And leaving, silently, without blame, was my way of remembering myself. Because I may forget many things, but not this. A man's worth is not measured by how long he is tolerated in someone else's house. It is measured by how quietly he can leave, with his head held high. No suitcase rolling behind me. No bitter farewell. Just a canvas bag slung over my shoulder, and silence where my goodbyes might have been. There was something freeing about it. Walking out before dawn, the city still asleep, my feet finding their way without needing to know each step. My hands were shaking slightly, as they often did now. But they weren't uncertain. Not that morning. I didn't leave out of anger. There was no revenge in my chest. Just the quiet decision of a man who has spent a life giving, and now simply wants a place where his presence doesn't tighten the air in a room. At the shelter, they welcomed me like an old neighbor finally coming home. It was a modest place, 3 small buildings around a courtyard filled with plants. Bougainvillea hung like soft curtains from wooden beams, and the benches were always warm from the sun. There were other men there, and women too, each with their own stories folded carefully into silence. They didn't ask questions. They didn't poke at the past. They just made space. My room was small, a bed with clean sheets, a wooden dresser, a window that caught the afternoon light, just right. I placed Maria's photo on the table by my bed, next to a lamp that flickered when you touched it. Her eyes seemed to understand, even from the frame, what I had done. Every morning, they brought us fresh bread and coffee. Strong, dark coffee that made my hand steady for a while. I helped out where I could. I watered the plants, swept the courtyard, played dominoes with a man named Tonico who hummed old songs with every move. Sometimes I forgot the rules halfway through a game, but no one laughed. They'd just smile and reset the pieces. One afternoon, Donna Iracema found me sitting by the garden, lost in thought. "You have kind hands," she said. I looked at her, confused. "Hands of someone who built," she explained. "Humble men always carry their story in their palms." I hadn't heard something that kind in so long it nearly broke me. In the days that followed, I began to feel lighter. Not healed, no. The cracks in me ran deep, but less heavy. Like a man who'd put down a burden he didn't realize he was still carrying. I made a decision. I didn't want the little money I had, my pension, what remained in the joint account with Marcio, to keep tying me to a place where I no longer belonged. I called the bank with the help of one of the shelter workers, a gentle girl named Lidisha. I asked to remove my name from the account. Quietly, no drama. Just a clean break. I had already set up a new one, where my small pension would now go directly. I told no one from the family. No need. Let them go on, uninterrupted. Then I asked Donna Iracema if she knew of a small project or a local need, someplace where help could stretch further than just coins. She brought me a pamphlet, a community school that offered literacy classes for older folks like me. They needed new books, light bulbs, and a coat of paint. I smiled. A few days later, I arranged a small donation in Maria's name. I imagined her face, the way she used to look when the kids from the neighborhood came to our house to read, her soft voice correcting their pronunciation, her hands wrapped in dishcloths as she turned pages. It felt right. I didn't tell Marcio. I didn't call Aline or my youngest, Claudio. I didn't even ask if they had noticed I was gone, because that wasn't the point. They had built a life where I was no longer needed or wanted. I didn't want to interrupt that. Not with guilt. Not even with my absence. This shelter, this quiet, these new faces who didn't look through me, was my fresh page. Even with the fog of memory curling around my mind like smoke, I could still write something new. One Sunday, while sitting under the shade of a mango tree, I found myself humming a tune I hadn't remembered in years. One Maria used to sing while washing clothes in the back. I closed my eyes and let it carry me. The words came back, not all at once, but enough. And for the first time in what felt like decades, I smiled without trying. I didn't think of Marcio that often, not with bitterness, just as a fact of life, like a street you once walked every day, that you now only pass in memory. There was no hate in me, not even sorrow, just a kind of settled understanding. Love, when given without condition, doesn't vanish, even when it isn't returned. But a man must still guard what remains of himself, especially when the world stops guarding it for him. And so, I made my final act. Not grand, not loud, but mine. I left the house I once helped pay for. I left the accounts. I left the roles they had written for me. Caretaker, babysitter, reminder of who they once were. I stepped off the stage without applause, without even an audience. But I didn't need one, because in the garden, as I pulled weeds or sipped my coffee or forgot what day it was without shame, I began to feel something again, that I was still a person, that I still mattered, if only quietly, if only to myself. And that, finally, was enough. And by the time they noticed I was gone, I had already begun to forget why I had stayed so long. It was a Wednesday, or perhaps a Thursday, when Marcio called the shelter. I was sitting by the garden, watching two birds flutter over the low wall, when Dona Iracema approached with the cordless phone in her hand. Her face was calm, but there was a small crease between her brows. "See you, Joaquim," she said gently. "Your son is on the line. He says it's urgent." I looked at her for a moment, not confused, just quiet. The name my son sounded distant, like a title from a chapter I had already closed. I didn't take the call, not out of spite, but because I had nothing to say. Not yet. Maybe never. I nodded toward the garden and said, "Tell him I'm all right." She did. I heard her voice from the porch, firm but kind. "He's safe. He doesn't wish to speak right now." She didn't elaborate. She didn't ask questions afterward. That's what I appreciated about her. The grace to let a man be whole, even when broken. Later that evening, while the sky turned the color of warm tea, I sat by my window and thought about how they must have found out. Maybe it was the unopened door at sunrise. Maybe it was the untouched plate of rice and beans Clarice had left outside my door. Maybe it was the silence, the absence of footsteps, of questions, of that soft cough I made each morning as I shuffled into the hallway. I imagined the initial shrug. He's probably in the courtyard, or sleeping. Then hours passed. Marcio knocking, calling, opening the guest room and seeing it empty. The canvas bag gone, the wardrobe half full, the photograph of Maria missing from the table. Maybe that's when his stomach dropped. Maybe Clarice asked, "What happened?" And he didn't know what to say. I don't imagine there was panic. Not at first. Just confusion. Annoyance, maybe. But then came the realization that I hadn't just wandered off. I had made a decision. I had walked away. And that must have shaken him. Because for all their growing coldness, for all the distance they placed between us, I think part of him still believed I would always be there. Like wallpaper. Like the sound of the fridge at night. Familiar. Expected. But I was gone. And something about that, the finality of it, must have echoed in the walls of that house. I didn't hear from Aline. Not directly. But Dona Iracema told me a woman had called 2 days later, crying on the other end of the line. Said she was my daughter. Asked if I was safe. Said she hadn't seen me in months, and now she didn't know where I was. I suppose Marcio had told her. Maybe she even scolded him. Maybe she was angry, at him, at herself, at me. But I had no words to offer. I was not angry. Not anymore. Just done. In the following days, the shelter phone rang a few more times. Always from the same numbers. Iracema would answer, listen, then look at me from across the patio. I'd meet her eyes and shake my head gently. She never pressured me. One afternoon, she brought me a small letter, unopened, with my name scribbled on the front in Marcio's handwriting. "Do you want to read it?" she asked. I looked at the envelope, the shaky loops of ink, the way the edge of the paper was smudged, like it had been held tightly. I held it for a moment. Then, without opening it, I slid it beneath the pages of my Bible. Maybe another day, I said. She nodded, and that was that. You see, sometimes it's not that you want to punish someone by refusing their words. It's just that your heart has already heard too many that came too late. What good is a sorry after the doors have already closed? What weight does "I didn't know" carry when you had every chance to notice and didn't? I imagined Marcio pacing in the kitchen, the kids asking where Vovo was. I imagined him dialing my number again, hearing it ring and ring. I imagined his voice in a message, maybe something like, "Pi, I didn't mean for it to get like this. I thought you were okay. I didn't know you felt like that." But I had felt like that for a long time. It wasn't one moment. It wasn't being left at the market, or forgotten on his birthday, or being told to go rest, like a child. It was the slow fading, the way I was seen less, heard less, needed less. And maybe now he felt it too, the sudden hole where I used to be. In the garden, there was a boy who came by every Tuesday to play his guitar for the residents. He couldn't have been more than 20. He didn't speak much, just sat and strummed soft, wordless melodies. One morning, I sat beside him and asked, "Do you know any songs about forgetting?" He smiled. "A few." "Then play me one," I said, "but make it soft." He did, and as the chords drifted into the sunlight, I felt the ache again, not of being forgotten, but of having remembered too much for too long. The call stopped after a week. Maybe Marcio told himself I needed space. Maybe Aline accepted it. Maybe Clarice was relieved. But in that silence, something shifted, because for the first time, they had to sit with my absence. Not my confusion, not my weakness, not my mistakes, but me gone. And I think that's when the weight began to settle in their chests. Not because they missed my help, not because they missed my body in the hallway, but because, deep down, they knew I had left with no intention of returning. And that truth, quiet, solid, and unspoken, was heavier than any word they could have said. And by the time they stopped calling, the quiet had begun to feel like company. It's strange how absence lingers louder than presence ever did. You don't realize how much space a person takes up until they're gone. Not the kind of gone where they're late for dinner or asleep in the next room. The kind of gone that leaves a chair permanently empty, a hallway unnaturally silent, and a familiar breath missing from the rhythm of the house. I imagine it must have started small. Maybe Clarice went to knock on my door one morning out of habit, only to remember I was no longer there. Maybe she hesitated, hand in midair, and then turned away quickly, embarrassed, as if her own forgetfulness had caught her. Or perhaps the children asked, "Where's Vovo?" when they came home from school, looking around for the man who always gave them half a banana, who always kept a small candy tucked in his shirt pocket even when he forgot why he'd gone into the kitchen. I wonder what Marcio said. He's resting somewhere. Maybe. Or he needed space. A sentence carefully chosen, light enough to pass, heavy enough to feel like truth. But children notice things. They'd see that the door to my room stayed open all day now, the bed untouched, the chair in the corner gathering dust. And that's the thing about consequences. They don't shout. They echo. I wasn't there anymore, but my absence lingered like the smell of old coffee in a cup left too long on the table. Maybe Marcio walked past my empty room one night and caught a glimpse of the blanket I used to fold with such precision. Maybe he remembered how I always adjusted the corners, smoothing out the wrinkles the way Maria once smoothed his fevered forehead. And maybe, just maybe, he felt something shift inside him. At the shelter, life was simple. We ate at set times. We took turns tending to the small vegetable garden. I spent mornings sweeping leaves into neat piles, and afternoons sitting under the old mango tree, listening to the sound of the wind rubbing through the leaves like an old song forgotten by time. No one rushed me. No one sighed when I repeated the same story twice. When I got confused, when I asked where I was or called a staff member by the wrong name, they didn't correct me sharply. They smiled. Gently. Sometimes one of the volunteers, a woman with kind eyes and a soft voice named Beatrice, would bring me a cup of warm milk with cinnamon. She'd sit beside me and talk about nothing in particular. Once I asked her, "Do you think people miss what they don't understand?" She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" I mean, I said slowly, if someone disappears, and the people they left behind never really saw them to begin with, can they truly miss what was there? She didn't answer right away. Just sipped her tea. I think, she finally said, sometimes people only start seeing you when you're no longer sitting in front of them. And that sat with me, like a stone resting in the folds of my heart. I began to wonder what life in Marcio's house felt like without me. Not harder, I imagine. Easier, probably. Fewer reminders to be patient. Fewer accidents. Fewer awkward silences during dinner. But colder, perhaps. Not because of my voice or presence, but because of what was missing underneath it all. That invisible warmth of being silently loved. Because love, the kind that makes tea, that folds your socks, that asks how your day was even when you don't answer, is not loud, but it leaves a hole when it's gone. I imagine Clarice cooking rice one afternoon and noticing there was still too much in the pot. No need to scoop the smaller portion into the little white bowl I used. Or Marcio waking up one Sunday and looking around the table, realizing it was strangely full of space. Maybe they noticed that the children stopped talking about me, or that one of them quietly placed a chair near the garden, out of habit, waiting for me to sit and watch the clouds again. One morning, Marcio must have opened his banking app and seen the account. The one we once shared was now only his. The moment he realized I had left it behind completely, not out of spite, not out of punishment, just as a man clearing the ledger of his life. That kind of clarity doesn't sting right away. It settles in slowly, like the moment you realize the tree outside your window has been cut down. You don't notice it until the morning light hits your room differently, until the breeze no longer hums the same. And that's when the questions start. When did he decide? Why didn't he say anything? What did I miss? And maybe the worst question of all, was it already too late before I even noticed? At the shelter, we had a small celebration for a resident's birthday. We sat in a circle, clapping along to an old song on a crackling speaker. I smiled. I even danced, just a little, enough to feel the blood still moving in my bones. Afterward, I sat beneath the tree and watched the sky. There was no pain that day, just breath, just warmth. And it struck me, not like a hammer, but like the gentle turning of a page. This was the first time in years I wasn't waiting for someone to see me. I wasn't sitting in a room, hoping to be remembered. I was just here, alive in the quiet. And that, more than anything, was the consequence I had chosen. To leave not just the house where I had become invisible, but the version of myself that had waited too long for someone else to notice. Now, they would have to sit with my silence. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I had chosen finally to protect what remained of me. Not the memory, not the role, but the man. And by the time the truth reached them, it had no words left, only weight. I didn't know when exactly it happened, but I felt it, like a wind changing direction without warning. The calls stopped. The letters stopped. Even the polite check-ins from neighbors, old friends, distant relatives. Everything went quiet, but not in an empty way, in a heavy way. It's the kind of silence that follows a truth you can't escape. Because the thing about walking away isn't just the absence, it's the mirror it leaves behind. A mirror no one wants to look into. At the shelter, life went on. Morning coffee, the clatter of spoons, sunlight stretching through the windows like long fingers touching all the tired places inside us. I had a rhythm now, a life of small things. I forgot more, yes. Some days I didn't know the name of the street, or the year, or even the name of the man I saw every day playing dominoes in the garden. But I remembered something else, something even stronger than names. I remembered how it felt to be treated with care, to be greeted in the morning not with, "Be careful," or "Don't touch that," but with, "How did you sleep, S.U. Joachim?" To be offered a chair, not because I was old and fragile, but because someone saw me standing. To be listened to, even when I repeated myself, even when I forgot the ending of the story I was trying to tell. There was a young volunteer named Andre who sat with me once a week. He read to me sometimes. Sometimes we just sat in silence. One day he asked, "Do you miss them? Your family?" I looked out at the jacaranda tree near the fence. Its blossoms had started to fall. "I missed the version of them I used to believe in," I said. He nodded slowly, not asking more. And I appreciated that. Because grief isn't always about death. Sometimes, it's about letting go of the picture you held onto too tightly. The one that was never really true to begin with. I still remembered things. Not perfectly. Not always clearly. But some truths don't need sharp edges to cut. I remembered the time I waited on the market bench, watching the sun crawl across the ground while my son, my own flesh, decided I wasn't worth the trouble of walking back. I remembered the birthday when I stood in the hallway with a gift in my hands and heard the laughter echoing from a room I wasn't invited into. I remembered folding the flannel shirt and placing it back in the drawer. A small gesture, but it felt like closing a door I could never open again. And now, on their end, they had to remember too, because that's what truth does. It waits, quietly, patiently, and when the noise of excuses and distractions finally dies down, it speaks. I heard from Donna Iracema that Marcio had come to the shelter one morning. He hadn't called first, just arrived, asked if he could see me. She said I was out in the courtyard, pruning the small lime tree that was struggling through the heat. But when she came to find me, I was already back in my room, lying down, eyes half closed. Not asleep, just still. She asked if I wanted to receive him. I looked at her and asked, "Did he bring anger?" She shook her head. "No, just sadness." That word stayed with me. Not guilt, not apologies, not even questions. Just sadness. I stood slowly. My knees hurt that day more than usual. I shuffled to the mirror, looked at my face, a face that time had carved deep, that sun had browned and life had worn thin, and I said, "Tell him I'll see him tomorrow." But he didn't come back the next day. Maybe he understood that seeing me now wouldn't change what had already settled in his bones. That sometimes the people we love leave, not in a rush, not in anger, but in silence. And when they do, we realize too late that we had been the ones walking away all along. Aline sent a letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just my name in neat handwriting. Inside, only a single page. "Pi," it began. "I don't know what to say. I keep trying to write something that will make it better, but I know it won't. We should have done more. We should have seen more. I'm sorry that it took your absence for us to understand what your presence truly meant. Marcio is quiet these days. He doesn't say much. Clarice tries to act like everything is fine, but even the children know something has changed. They asked about you this morning. I didn't know how to answer. All I could say was, Vovo is somewhere peaceful now. I hope that's true. I hope you are not cold. I hope you are not alone. I hope you are being loved in the ways we forgot to show. I won't ask you to come back. You've already done more than enough. But if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Love always. Aline." I folded the letter and placed it beside Maria's photo. Didn't cry. Didn't smile. Just felt the truth of it settle in the room, like dust on the windowsill. I believed her. I did. But I also knew. There are words that come too late not because they aren't honest, but because the moment to hear them passed when no one thought to speak. And I no longer lived in the moment of their regret. I lived here, in the rhythm of birdsong, the softness of morning bread, the slow, gentle forgetting of everything that once broke me. Marcio never wrote. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't know how. And that, somehow, was more painful than if he had told me I was never wanted. Because silence, when it's full of knowing, weighs heavier than any cruel word. The truth had finally caught up to them. And in doing so, it had released me. From the weight, from the ache, from the hope that maybe, one day, they would see. Because now they did. And I didn't need them to say it. I could feel it, in the quiet they left behind. Now I sit beneath the same mango tree every morning, watching the light sift through the leaves like memory, slow, delicate, soft around the edges. There are still days when I forget things. My hands fumble. My mind wanders. Names escape me like birds startled from a branch. I once looked at my own reflection and didn't recognize the man staring back. I blinked at him, waiting for the lines of his face to become familiar, but they didn't. Not right away. But this place, this quiet corner of the world where people greet me by name, where no one rushes me, where a mistake isn't met with sighs, but with kindness, This place knows me. And I have come to know myself here too. They say when a man gets old, he returns to childhood. But I don't believe that. Childhood is about learning the world. Old age is about letting go of it. And I've let go of many things. I've let go of a house I built with cracked hands and tired shoulders. I've let go of the walls that once held my children's laughter, and later, their silence. I've let go of the feeling that I had to stay useful, stay small, stay out of the way, just to keep their patience intact. Most of all, I've let go of the quiet ache of waiting to be seen. Now, in the stillness of this garden, I am not waiting. I am being. There's a tree here that blooms bright orange flowers every spring. The staff say it's old, older than most of the residents. Some years it doesn't bloom at all. Other years it erupts in color. No one knows why. It just does what it does. And no one asks it to explain. I think I've become like that tree. Some days I bloom. Others I don't. But still I'm rooted. Still alive. Still mine. Yesterday, Beatrice, the volunteer with the warm hands, brought me a new photo frame. Said she noticed the one with Maria was cracked at the corner. I hadn't even seen it. But she had. We replaced it together, carefully sliding the photo into the clean glass. Maria's smile still takes me by surprise. It's the same one I remember from the day she held Marcio for the first time, wrapped in an old hospital blanket, her eyes tired but shining. I keep her on the table next to my bed, not because I'm clinging to the past, but because she reminds me of who I was when I was whole, and of the quiet strength I still carry. I don't expect the children to come. Not anymore. I don't check the door. I don't ask the staff if anyone's called. That part of me, the part that waited for a knock, a visit, a voice calling, "Pi," it has gone quiet. And I think that's what peace is. Not the absence of pain, but the absence of need. Aileen's letter remains in the drawer. I read it once more last week, then folded it back neatly. I don't carry anger in my chest. Just space. Space where grief used to live. Space where disappointment sat, like an uninvited guest who finally rose and saw himself out. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit on the bench at the far end of the courtyard. The sun sets just beyond the low wall, and everything turns golden. In those moments, I think of them, Marcio, Aileen, Claudio, not with sorrow, but with softness. They were mine once, and I was theirs, and that was enough. We don't get to choose how we're remembered, only how we live. And I lived as a father, fully, quietly, with both hands open. What they did with what I gave, that's not mine to carry anymore. I have a friend here named SCU Pedro. He used to be a tailor, makes beautiful paper flowers now, out of old magazines. The other day he gave me one and said, "For your wife." I thanked him. I placed it next to Maria's frame, and I whispered, "We're all right now." Because we are. I may forget many things. Where I put my shoes, what day it is, whether I had sugar in my coffee or not. But I will not forget this. The dignity of stepping away when staying meant disappearing. The strength of choosing peace over pleading. The grace of being alone, but never lost. And so here I am. Not waiting. Not wishing. Just breathing. Just free. That day when I left, without a word, without noise, they lost a father. And I finally found my peace.